topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
What's working on purpose anyway? Each week, we ponder the answer to this question. People ache for meaning and purpose at work, to contribute their talents passionately and know their lives really matter. They crave being part of an organization that inspires them and helps them grow into realizing their highest potential. Business can be such a force for good in the world, elevating humanity. In our program, we provide guidance and inspiration to help usher in this world we all want, working on purpose. Now, here's your host, Dr. Elise Cortez.
Welcome back to the Working on Purpose program, which has been brought to you with passion and pride since February of 2015. Thanks for tuning in this week. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. If we've not met before and you don't know me, I'm an organizational psychologist and logotherapist, speaker, and author. My team and I at Gusto Now help companies to enliven and fortify their operations and increase profitability by articulating their purpose and building inspirational leaders and cultures activated by meaning and purpose. Our mission is to help the companies we serve create a destination workplace where people flock to join, are intrinsically motivated to perform at their best, can grow into their fuller potential, and are committed to stay and dynamically deliver on the company's mission. You can learn more about us and how we can work together at gusto-now.com or my personal site, elisecortez.com. Now, getting into today's program, we have someone very fun and special to bring you this week. Drawing on a lifetime experience in opera, theater, and film, David Pearl has pioneered the use of the arts in business and is the creative confidant to high-profile CEOs and their teams across the globe. He's an ex-BBC broadcaster and today is responsible for designing, orchestrating, and animating on and off high-stakes meetings the world over. He's the founder of the nonprofit social venture Street Wisdom and keeps his creative insights sharp with his improvising ensemble, Impropera, I think it's called. He describes the common thread between all his work as finding the inspiration in the everyday, every day. He's the author of a few books, the latest called Wanderful, Find Wonder in the Everyday, Every Day. We'll be talking about this book and his creation, Street Wisdom, on today's program. He joins us today from London. David, a very hearty welcome to Working on Purpose.
I'm very happy to be here. How lovely is this?
Right? Oh, it's more fun than it's supposed to be, so don't tell anyone.
Okay, it's our secret.
Well, first, let's thank Monica Parker, because that's how I found you when I read her book on Wonder, and you were featured in there. And of course, the first thing I did was I went to my friend LinkedIn to see if I could find you, and you were good enough to accept my invitation to join my network. And then I said, you must come on my podcast as well and talk about your work and your life. And you said yes.
Well, it's interesting. I think we're both fans of intention. I mean, given what I know of your work and how important purpose is and how it I find that on the internet, you get a sense of that before people have even spoken. We're all hustling around on the internet. But there was something about the way you asked the question, I just sensed, I thought, you know what? Yeah, that's a yes. So here we are.
Oh, I love it. Well, for our viewers who are watching here, here's the book, Wanderful. It's so delightful. And we're going to talk about that today. But David Pearl, you are an incredible specimen. I love that we call you an experienced engineer, but we have to hear a little bit about how this person, this human that brought us Street Wisdom and other things we're going to talk about came to be. And can you start with the story of hearing Placido Domingo sing opera and how it was, how that experience was for you, what it did to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I do feel that I've wandered my way to here. It's been splendidly unexpected, but one of the defining moments of my young life, I was 8 years old, I think, and a teacher at my school had noticed that I had a kind of voice, organized for me to have an audition at the Royal Opera House, which is here in London, and they gave me a job, which I thought was going to happen for the rest of my life. You know, when you're 8, you think, oh, well, that's what happens. You sing and they give you a job. It hasn't always been that simple since then. But anyway, the first opera singer I heard close up, and I mean like 4 feet away from me, was a young Placido Domingo who was about to do his Covent Garden debut, as was I, in an opera called Tosca. And I remember, I shall never forget, it changed me forever. I was arrived for a rehearsal one morning. I mean, have you ever been on a huge international theatre stage during rehearsal times? But it's just like in the movies. There are scene shifters moving, and there's dust and ropes, and you know, you look up and it seems to go to heaven. It just disappears into the darkness. And I sang my little song at the beginning of the third act of Tosca, and then this guy, like a big guy in a t-shirt, stripy t-shirt, put his big fat hand on my shoulder and went, bravo, bravo. And I thought, well, that's very nice. Who are you? And he turned like a few steps and began to sing. And it was Domingo. And you know how music is. It's not rational, it's emotional. And from that second, when I heard him sing, I went, that's real. And I was 8 years old. And I'd always had this, as long as I can remember, I had this sense that the adults were lying to me. They were sort of, I'm sure lots of kids are like that. They go, hang on, there's a secret they're telling us. And I remember at the time thinking, that's what's real. Everything else, all school and shops, no, that's not real. This is what's real. So I obviously connected with something. Yeah, the opera was very powerful, but there was also something seemed to me irreducibly true about the sound that was coming out. And that's never really left me.
Ooh, it's amazing that happened to you at age 8. You know, it's amazing, right? And you've gone on and done all these amazing things. And don't think for a second, like I've been talking about, you have to sing a little something. But that you went on and you have been singing opera. You still do today, and you do improv on the streets and for opera, and you've done all these things. And so, you know, your road to becoming who you are and how you've, I would say, collected experiences to fold into your person has been extraordinary, David.
Yeah, it is. It puzzles me. I feel immensely fortunate, partly because for earlier in my life, I felt like things were very scattered and I wasn't sure. I couldn't feel the thread that joined them. I seemed to be doing different things. I'd been grown up in a family where my father was a role model in the sense that he did many things. He was he was a dentist. He was a lawyer. He ended as a judge. He was an artist. He did many things. So I guess I thought you're supposed to do different things at the same time. But I'll be honest, it hasn't been an ordinary path, because when I was younger, I assumed I would be some sort of full-time performer. I go straight into the arts, and I have always been in the arts. But this falling into business, which happened in my sort of late 20s, was unexpected, and for many people quite puzzling. I'd had a show on the BBC, which is probably in my 30s now I think about it, and a company who I'm sure they won't mind me mentioning it, called McKinsey, which is a big management consultancy.
Right.
In fact, they might mention, in which case, at some point during this podcast, a dart might go in my neck, and you might have to.
Don't worry, I'll save you, David. Don't worry.
Okay. You'll take the dart. I think my friends at McKinsey, I've worked there with them on and off for many years. I think they'd appreciate that. They were thinking at the time about, was there a link between art and business? What could business people learn from the arts and vice versa? And I fell into doing that and found it really satisfying. There's something very gratifying and interesting about taking the skills you have into an area where they're not common. I'm sure you feel this in the work that you do, and where there is actually a big appetite. Sometimes working in the arts, I'll be honest, can be dull, and it can be full of people who are sort of, the performances are stimulating, but the hours of practice and the long days of waiting around are not much fun. So I've actually been super fortunate in that a part of my life is pure performing, music and song, and yes, I will sing to you at some point. Part Part of it is what I call experience engineering, which in your kind introduction you mentioned, which is really bringing some of the techniques, I suppose, of theatre into the everyday and making meetings and conferences unusually impactful. And part of it is a non-profit area called Street Wisdom, which again is the red thread here is, I think, creativity. And for me, Street Wisdom is a creative practice that you can do in the streets, where and whenever you are.
Mm-hmm. And we will get to that. But for listeners and viewers who haven't read the book yet, I just want to also situate just a little bit more of David's background. So he says he's played double bass in orchestra, studied English, not music, he says, at university, wrote in film and advertising, set up an in-opera cum circus company. I'm not sure what that means. Studied improvisation, which I do too, by the way, amazing. Presented music shows on the BBC. And through all that, fell into working with businesses, helping organizations and those that lead them to be more inspired and inspiring, which of course I completely relate to. But that is quite an interesting, like I say, collection of experiences that you folded into your person.
Yeah, I'm honest. If I'm honest, sometimes I flick back through photos on my Mac, and just going back a few years, I love variety. So I look back and go, wow, you're a lucky boy. I'm in and out of the most bizarre places. You know, I'm like Zelig. I'm in palaces and governments. And someone's like, what is he doing there? So I find it is an interesting grab bag of different skills. I would say, what is it? So, I was thinking about this recently, and I can't remember I was talking to you about it, but creativity is a little bit like, the way I think of it is like, it's inside you and it's like a puppy dog. And what your job with creativity is to throw a stick, and then your creativity goes and gets the stick and brings it back. It's almost putting your creativity to work. And if you're going to do it, throw a big stick and throw it a long way. And so I think what I often do for myself is, and I'm as distracted and as idle as the next person, but there's something that amuses me about throwing the stick for my creativity to bring back. And I guess that's why I've done a variety of different things and grown in confidence. I mean, you after a while of people not kicking you out of offices and, central banks and whatever, or wherever it is, or indeed on the street, you've done improv. There's nothing more direct than having to sing to an audience on the street. I think your confidence grows, my confidence has grown, and I've begun to feel more relaxed and more that it doesn't really matter what the context is. Show up, put your attention on the other person, be full of love, and go with what comes up is really what that's my MO, I think.
Oh, I totally align with that. So let's do this next, David. Let's throw the stick, and I would love to hear just whatever you might want to sing for us today.
Oh, you want me to sing something for you?
Yeah, a little bit, please.
Let me sing you just a very. So I've just come back from Florence, where my wife and I celebrated our 30th wedding anniversary. 30 years ago, I stood someone sent me to sing under her window. It actually was 32 years ago. And I'm sure she won't mind if I sing you the beginning of the song I sang to her under the window, okay? It's called Mattinata, and it goes a bit, I don't know whether the mic will like this, so I'll sit back a little bit from it, and I'll see what happens. L'aurora di bianco vestita, già l'uscio dischiudi al gran sol, di già con le rose sue dita, carezza di fiori lo stuol, commossa da un fremito arcano, intorno il creato già par. E tu non ti desti ed in vana mi sto qui dolente a cantar. And so on.
Well, no wonder she married you, my friend. Goodness gracious. Now, I know a little Italian, but I didn't follow that. What was the gist of it?
Oh, like most Italian opera singers, he is complaining. He's waiting outside the house of his loved one. He says, look, Dawn has put on her clothes and she's come out to play and she's turning the world wide. Why are you waiting? I'm waiting to sing to you and you won't open your windows. Come down and play is basically what he's saying.
Oh, delightful. Oh my goodness. I would totally marry someone that did that for me. So goodness gracious. Okay, well, now let's talk about street wisdom. This is really where, and I'm on the subscription list, by the way, so I'm getting these memos, and I understand there's something happening in Austin, Texas, which is just a couple hours south of me here in a couple of weeks. So give it to us, David. How did this street wisdom start? I know how it did, but the rest of the people who haven't read your book don't.
Okay, well, I mean, when I tried to trace it back in the book, it went back and back and back. It actually included that moment with Domingo, which was a sort of moment of puncturing through the everyday to find the kind of miraculous. I think that's what's in a lot of modern myths. It's a lot of movies like that. I think the entire Harry Potter franchise is based on this idea that, and indeed all the superpower films are based on this idea, for me anyway, of beyond our daily normality, miracles and wonder await if you just could find your way through. And I had done lots of self-development work and spiritual work and various things, and it included doing exercises on myself. And one of them had been given to me by some very wise people, which was, the actual wording was walk in circles in public places.
Yes.
What is that? And so I didn't do it. I thought, well, it's some poetic thing. But years later, I thought, why don't I try that? And it was revelatory, because walking in, I went down to Leicester Square, which some of your listeners may know, which is in a large, busy square in London. And I started walking in a really big circle, which I knew was cheating, because no one could see the circle, right? I was just a guy walking. So I thought, okay. And as I tightened the circle, and as I walked in more obviously a circle, I became less and less comfortable, because I felt I was being watched by people that must think he's insane, because walking in circles is, after all, a definition, or one of the kind of standard ways you describe going around in circles, is a kind of inane and slightly insane activity. But what was it? As I stuck to it, I also had another revelation, which was that no one seemed to be looking at me. What they were doing, in fact, no one was really looking at anything. They were thinking. People were walking down the streets with their eyes turned inwards. In the opera world, we call it snake eyes, where you just kind of get this glazed look. And people were thinking. They weren't really looking. They weren't seeing. So I thought, that's interesting. And the second thing I thought was, I actually don't know even if they were looking at me, I wouldn't know unless I asked them, because my fear that they think I look odd is mine. And it was that moment that I think the Buddhists sometimes talk about, which is they say, nothing's coming from the other side. It was a moment of realizing that a lot of the time we're not in the world, we're in our thoughts about the world and our opinions and judgments and so on. I thought, wow, this is interesting. And so I realized that it's almost like I had an invisibility cloak.
Yep.
And I felt like this could be a very interesting place to work with people. Like you, I suspect I've worked a lot in offices and boardrooms and so on. And I started taking people out of those familiar environments into the street, where also, of course, they didn't really have an identity. In a business or in a home or in a kind of social context, you walk in and you have an identity. But the street, the public realm, you're in a way freer to be anonymous. And that for the sorts of senior people I often work with is a real release. They can they can disappear and simultaneously be very present. So I don't know if that makes sense. And that was the seed of street wisdom, and it's gone on it's in 94 countries around the world. It's been it's a beautiful thing, because it's both a gift in that I wanted to make it free, and also an experience of what a passion project can be like. When you put strong intention into it, lots of love, it can also really flourish. So it's been a very interesting double lesson, that.
Mm. And we're going to talk more about just what's involved with it. But let's grab our first break here. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with David Pearl. He's a world-renowned experience engineer and the founder of Street Wisdom, which we've been talking about and we'll hear more about after the break.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, as I also am dedicated to helping create a world where people realize their potential at work and are led by inspirational leaders that help them find and contribute their greatness, and we do business that betters the world. I keep researching and writing my own books. So my last one came out in March of 2023. It's called The Great Revitalization, How Activating Meaning and Purpose Can Radically Enliven Your Business. So check it out. It's on Amazon and my website, elisecortez.com, as well as gusto-now.com. If you are just joining us, my guest is David Pearl. He's the author of Wanderful, Find Wonder in the Everyday, Every Day. So I love the premise of Street Wisdom, David. It just delights me. And you say in your book that, this idea that there is inexhaustible supply of ideas around us all the time if we just simply know how to look.
I think that's right. I mean, I think we have literature and the printing press have been great for humanity in many ways, but also they've progressively, I think, encouraged us to ignore other forms of learning, other forms of intelligence, and also to stop asking questions in different ways. I came from a pretty literary background. My father would send me to the dictionary and to encyclopedia, wouldn't send me to the forest or to ask the swallows and whatever. And it might sound a bit kooky, but for many, many eons, human beings read the world symbolically.
Yeah.
So the direction of the wind or the movement of the swallows, whatever, we read the landscape, both the actual and the imagined dream landscape. And our unconscious mind, as I understand it, speaks fluent symbol. It doesn't necessarily speak Google language. And so whilst the internet is pretty good, the search engine is pretty good for the gray matter here, the heart and the viscera and most of our body, our embodied intelligence, is also very attuned, if we let it be, to non-rational inputs. And what we found over time is that if you wander, if you ask a question and go for a wander, you will encounter answers. We can talk more about it. Mm-hmm. The environment will feel like it's interacting with you. The environment isn't just something that you need to screen out and get through in order to get to the next task. And it's been a revelation to me, I must say.
Mm-hmm. But I love how you go on to say, this is just so delightful. You go on to say the answers are everywhere. If we reach out and ask, the world is our creative playmate if we're willing to play. Street Wisdom uses the street and the urban landscapes as the stimuli and mirror for our thinking. It awakens our sensibilities and fires up our innate intelligences. And then you go on to really talk about how important the movement is. That, you mentioned embodied intelligence, but there's something about movement that's important to this.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, I think we notice it in ourselves. You've got a problem in your mind, you get up, you walk back, you pace back and forth. If you go to Hollywood, you'll see writers very often walk and talk and so on and so forth. I think the idea that the best way to think is to immobilize your body and sit in front of a screen is a very limited and very modern idea. How many times do you have the eureka movement when you're actually in motion? Actually, Archimedes' eureka moment literally happened when he got in the bath, remember? And we've all had that feeling. You've had a long day, you're working really hard, and then your loved one says, you know what, chill out, have a drink. You can't have a bath. Get in the bath, and as you relax, as your body changes its energetically, the idea pops up. And I think that's really part of why people take to street wisdom as a complement to their normal thinking. It's not designed to replace rational thought, but many people, I think they do it anyway. A lot of business people will find themselves, if they give themselves permission, they'll go out, they'll leave the building in order to think things through differently.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I love that you talk about this, and I align with this. You say wonder is a decision, and I love that. It's a choice. It's there for us, and I love that. That opens so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think I like that you like that, because I think that, again, we've limited our expectations to the fact that, to experience wonder, you need to go to the Gulf of Mexico. You need to go to the Yucatan. In other words, there are certain places in the world, certain times that we would associate with dawn breaking over the Rockies. No doubt, those of us that have been lucky enough to see that, there are higher incidents of wonder. Or talk to somebody who is a farmer on the Rockies and ask if they feel wonder when the sun comes up, and they'll probably say, no, I'm looking at my seed drills, right? So it's a decision. And I think what's important is to remember that I think wonder is available all the time, every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we can begin to accept that as a possibility, even in tricky places, wonder, the ability of kind of like, wow, we're alive. This is happening right now. The curiosity that comes with that, the sense of inspiration is actually, I think, available, provided you say it's possible.
I am in complete alignment as well, and I teach some of that same stuff, which brings me to where I want to go next, because you are an experienced engineer. You have designed these, what you call WalkShops, which I love that, play on workshops, WalkShops, and they're 3-hour experiences, and they are each phase. There are 3 phases I learned about in your book that they're very intentional about how you set people up. So will you share with us the design of these WalkShops?
Of course I will. And I will say that since I've wrote the book, and we had the thing called the pandemic, I don't know if you had something like that in America, but there was a small flu bug went around. And during COVID, we found that actually we could do great workshops in an hour. So very often they've now crunched down in length, or they can be long. But the 3 phases are pretty much the same the whole time. So the first phase is called the tune-up. And during that, we encourage people to go on very short little wanders and keeping an instruction in mind. And the first instruction, for example, is be drawn to what attracts you and notice what doesn't. And if you can't be, you may not, if you're not watching this podcast, this show, you won't have seen that there's a movement that goes with it, because I'm trained in hypnosis as well. And it's important that we get people getting the full value of that wander. So for that wander, for example, people start being drawn to what attracts them. It's a way of waking up their senses, and also of activating the body to go towards what it's curious about, which we were trained out of, most of us at school. It would be a very weird world if every time we saw something or someone that attracted us, we walked towards it like a toddler. That would be very odd. But these tune-ups basically awaken people's senses, and they get them to log into what we call the internet, the universe. So you logged in during the tune-up phase. The second phase is called the quest, where you take that connectedness, go for a wander, asking the question that I mentioned before. And what happens there is when you ask a question, it makes your walk intentional. And what that does, it seems, is the street. Imagine the street is a play friend. They like to have something to work on with you. If you're just blissed out walking through the streets, and that's also okay. But I've found that the conversation with your environment really only kicks in when you have a question you want answered. Yeah. And then the third phase is called the sharing, self-evidently. It's where you meet up with other people if you're doing a live one or online, and share what happened. And it's important, we've learned over the years, to keep it very, very simple, to lower expectations. And so there will be people who come on, the WalkShops, and they're determined this is going to be a massive breakthrough for them. And you can see them working really hard at it. So what we say to them is, relax. In the sharing, we ask, what popped out at you? What struck you? Just one thing, and how might it be an answer to your question? Rather than making it an answer to your question, how might it be? And that seems to unlock the most fruitful conversations. So the tune-up, the quest, and the sharing. And by keeping it this simple and requiring no sort of professional training to do it, you can do it for yourself, or volunteers do them all over the world. We give them additional support, but it's very simple. For consciously, we made it very simple. It seems to work really powerfully.
Well, but then you also introduced this one little element of disorientation, and meaning that you intentionally don't tell the people up front where you're going to be meeting for the sharing spot. Usually you say you go into a cafe or something like that, but you don't tell them until toward the very end just where they're going to meet. And I think that is fascinating and delightful. And I can see why people are like, well, what do you mean you don't know we're going to be meeting?
Yeah, I'm glad you like that as well. I mean, the reason for that is that adults, those of us who find ourselves thinking of ourselves as adults, constantly on a schedule, and they're constantly trying to. So what I wanted to do on Street Wisdom was let people drop the responsibility for time and place, and the facilitators, whoever facilitating it, will stand still and not move, so that you can always find your way back. And at the end, we'll let people, rather than them have to think, oh, how am I going to navigate from certain place and be grown up and efficient about it? We want them, to get lost and find treasure. So we will handle the end and let the end be a surprise, a delightful surprise. I mean, that in itself, how often do you allow yourself time to have delightful surprises in a normal working day? Answer, not very often. So that's what it's about.
Or even to be lost. I love the story you talked about being lost, and I can relate to that too. And so the element of, being heightened in your awareness and your senses turned on to get yourself unlost. Very, very, very fascinating and just interesting stuff. So we'll talk more about that. Let's grab our last break. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. We've been on the air with David Pearl. He's a world-renowned experience engineer and the founder of Street Wisdom, which we've been talking about. After the break, we're going to hear a couple stories about how it's actually worked with people around the world who've been participants. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Dr. Elise Cortez is a management consultant specializing in meaning and purpose, an inspirational speaker and author. She helps companies visioneer for greater purpose among stakeholders and develop purpose-inspired leadership and meaning-infused cultures that elevate fulfillment, performance, and commitment within the workforce. To learn more or to invite Elise to speak to your organization, please visit her at elisecortez.com. Let's talk about how to get your employees working on purpose. This is Working on Purpose with Dr. Elise Cortez. To reach our program today or to open a conversation with Elise, send an email to Elise, A-L-I-S-E, at elisecortez.com. Now, back to Working on Purpose.
Thanks for staying with us and welcome back to Working on Purpose. I'm your host, Dr. Elise Cortez. I mentioned in the last break about my latest book coming out, The Great Revitalization. What I did for you is I created a 3-page assessment for you to be able to download from my website to be able to help you understand the extent to which your organization is designed for the needs and desires of today's workforce. You can find it at gusto-now.com. If you are just now joining us, my guest is David Pearl. He's the author of Wanderful, Find Wonder in the Everyday, Every Day. So, as you mentioned earlier, one of the things I was amazed at, David, is that this stuff is free. So you mentioned in your book that you decided to give this away, and that you were inspired by the open source and shareware movement, and so you have made your instructions available to the public for free. That is amazing. What's behind that?
Gosh, that's a good question. My first thing that comes to mind is the wisdom that's out there is free. It's being offered by the street free. So how can I charge for it? That doesn't seem polite. When we do charge, and increasingly there's a sort of commercial side to street wisdom, because businesses have come and said, we really want to do this. Will you come and create bespoke programs, which we do? But on the making it freeness, I've sort of since then learned probably why I did that, and it relates to system change. And you'll know about this because you work in in all sorts of elaborate systems. And I was talking about system change recently, and I thought retrospectively this is probably why I did what I did, which is that I was saying, if you want to change the system, three things are important. One is that the system doesn't notice. The second is that it doesn't cost anything. And the third is it's really good fun, because you're going to need lots of energy to do it. And I think in a funny way, in a small way, the WalkShops, Street Wisdom is a system change. It's trying to inject into a system which is all about routine and work, lifefulness, inspiration, freedom, mental freedom, emotional freedom, and so on. Getting cities to talk to each other, becoming more lovable places and livable places. And I think that lowering the barrier of entry by not having a fee is important. I will say it's been tempting over the years to put one in, not from financial reasons, but just because people tend to have a tendency to turn up to something that they have paid for. And what we find is there is almost invariable 50% drop-off rate. People, 100 people will say they turn up, 51 people will show up, which I have no issue with, because the people will show up when it's time, and there's no issue. But sometimes we thought, maybe if we charge them $5, then they'd be more likely to turn up. But it is what it is, and I'm glad we've done what we've done.
Well, then how is it? So you have some kind of a program where you're teaching people to become facilitators, so they can actually conduct street wisdom tours, if you will, or experiences, I should say WalkShops in their own cities. What's that program like?
That's an informal thing. We used to call it the Street Wizard School, but it's an informal thing. What again, back to our very first comment, which is that you can sense intention on the internet. There are a lot of people who sort of drive-bys, and that's great. That's great. They pick it up, they put it down. But there are some people that pick up street wisdom for whatever reason. It speaks to them. It links to the work that they do. Otherwise, many are coaches, but not all by any means. And those people, if they get curious, I'm a sucker for people who are curious to know more, and will organize online online sessions, or help them prep for the sessions that they do. Doing it is the best way of learning about it. And quite often coaches actually come to us and want to use it with their businesses, in which case, and especially if they're being paid for it, we organize, it's a voluntary basis, but some form of exchange of either energy or money often changes hands. But I didn't want it to turn into a financial policing thing. That's not in the spirit of street wisdom. It's all about generosity, and it's been a continuing lesson in trusting the emergent, if I can put it that way. And of course, business tests that in you. You feel often, I don't know if you do, but sometimes you feel stressed, and there seems to be pressure, and sometimes one can feel a little bit competitive, and so on and so forth. But I found the more I and my colleagues run the business in the street with the spirit, the better.
So the only I haven't that I can think of approximate anything to what you're talking about. However, the one little thing that maybe fits in this camp is a few years ago, my daughter, who's now 21 years old, came up with this idea that for Christmas, what she wanted to do was she wanted us to make our sugar cookies with the icing on top, the really good yummy ones, make some sandwiches, and then we would go out into the street and disperse them. So I said, let's add water, let's add a little bit of cash as well. But what's been fascinating about it, David, is we go and she, with her friend usually in the backseat dispersing, I'm driving. I always want to ask, what has you on the streets? And so hearing the stories of what people share, of what has them on the streets, as we give them this, we've made you cookies and a sandwich, has been phenomenal education and a way for me to understand things about life in the world that I just wouldn't otherwise normally access. It's the closest thing so far to what I think I've experienced that might fit in the street wisdom camp.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot in that story, and it's great you do that. I think that strangers are teachers. That famous phrase, an enemy is just a stranger whose story you haven't heard yet. Mm-hmm. I think because we don't really connect, we judge really from a distance. And there are good reasons perhaps for being judgmental. It's a safety, apart from anything, in cities. But when you have the courage to be able to, perhaps sink beneath those barriers and engage in common humanity, it's quite miraculous. It's quite amazing, the common cause you find. And that's the sort of the knitting together of society that I think I'm interested in, and doing that in a light touch way. There's a lot of loneliness out there, and a lot of people find themselves on the streets. I myself had a period when I was younger and I was experiencing depression. I mentioned that I was unable to keep all the different parts of my life together. It felt very dramatic, and I found for a short amount of time I was wandering about, and not in a very enjoyable way. And the kindnesses that I experienced there really stayed with me, and I think I've probably woven them into this idea of street wisdom.
So beautiful, David. And when I was crafting, as you know, my process is I read the book cover to cover, I take notes that become part of my research process, and they go into my speeches and my books, etc. And I use this part here that I want to read next from your book as the basis of what I created for the description of this particular episode. But you say, and when we talk about the allure and the promise of street wisdom's WalkShops, I love that you talk about this. You say, today, participants are finding street wisdom a powerful way to activate their awareness and log into the database of flattened wisdom that surrounds us. At a time when we're increasingly lost in our heads, disoriented by fake news, closed-loop networks, and biased reinforcing echo chambers, street wisdom helps us to turn our attention outwards again, to escape the mental musings and daydreams and enjoy a present tense, right here, right now, full sensory life experience of being human.
Did I write that? I mean,
you did indeed, my friend. It's so stunningly beautiful.
I don't know if you ever get this feeling, but I think this links to my experience as both an improviser and as a student of street wisdom, which is that when you're sort of in flow, you don't necessarily remember what happened particularly, or it seems like it's happening to somebody else. And I certainly, when I'm writing, it flows out of me. And of course, I've edited it and so on and so forth. But I'm really listening to you say that and thinking, wow, yeah, that guy seems to have an interesting thing to say, but I don't recognize it as mine. So thank you. It's very touching.
Oh, it's wonderful. I love, reading bits and such that really, really speak to me. So we can't leave without hearing a story or two about a couple of people that maybe have experienced your WalkShops, and what did that do for them? What did they discover?
Oh my goodness. Well, one of the reasons I wrote the Wanderful was an excuse to kind of go around and harvest stories. And there are so many. And I will say to the people listening and watching that there is a bell curve. Obviously, there are people for whom I don't know anybody who said it didn't work at all, because at the very least, it's great to give yourself permission to have a bit of a wander. And there are those who have had life-changing experiences. And then in the middle, what very often it's more like having counsel, a sort of whispered counsel on, you've got to, Very often it's about what's my next step at work and life, in diet or food or whatever. And we humans like to have a little bit of encouragement or a little bit of insight to the next step, because the future's scary for us. But the one that comes to mind is, there are many, but one that comes to mind is a friend of mine, Scott, who was on, I think, the very first Street Wisdom we did in London. I don't know how he got there, but anyway, he at the time was doing a job where he was very successful, but not hated, but wanted to do something else. And so he asked the question, and by the way, his job was a very glamorous job. And it was in the fashion business. And he asked the question something like, I'm going to jump, but when should I? And he wandered and he found himself walking down a street, which is where he had his first job in London, in a fashion street. As he wandered down that street, he bumped into 3 people he knew, one of whom lived in Australia, so had no reason to be there. All of them were from the fashion business, and they all asked him the same question, which is, why haven't you set up that new business yet? By the time he finished that walk, he decided, that's it, I'm setting up the business. It was like the world was nudging him in a way that I think we said it earlier on, sometimes your unconscious mind knows the answer. And an experience like Street Wisdom helps that answer become present to your conscious mind. So Scott he runs a very successful different company now called Boom. And that's something that happened to him on a Street Wisdom. I also have a friend of mine, she decided she didn't actually do the divorce, but her marriage hadn't been so hot. And her then husband called during Street Wisdom, and that was the point that she decided, you know what, enough's enough. But that was a one-off, right? And it's not a common response. But there are many, 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 many examples where people have had unusually clear directions. And sometimes people come back with a long face. There was a girl I remember who was in 2 minds about going to Canada to have a baby with her boyfriend. This was it. So she went out because she felt like, no, I'm going to do something else. She came back long face. I said, what happened with you? Did you get an answer? She said, oh, I got an answer. I said, you're not happy about it? She said, well, it's pretty ambiguous. So apparently she'd gone out, and the first thing she saw was a Canadian Airlines advert on a bus. And then she turned and she saw a huge billboard of a baby. And then as she was trying to escape, she ran to the Nike building, which said, just do it. And it was like, okay. But what is interesting, what I often say to people is at the end, remember that you are selecting the things that you're seeing. Someone else, you might have gone down the road asking a different question and being you wouldn't have selected those things. So in a way, in a strong way, you're not walking through the street, you're walking through your own psyche.
Yes.
Everything that you see is your choice. So it's your thinking being reflected back to you often.
Oh, David, this has just been it goes by so fast when it's this much fun. We've come to the end of the show. I think by now you know this program is listened by people around the world, and they are tuning in because they want to improve their own experience of work, to make it a place where they can actually step into their shine, or they want to become a better inspirational leader to help people to usher themselves into a higher state of their own consciousness and contribution. What would you like to leave them with today?
I would... gratitude is really helpful. Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, inside or outside, take the word gratitude in lovely bright colors and wallpaper it at the back of your mind as you look out at the present moment, and recognize you couldn't be anywhere else, doing anything else, being anything else. And it's a miracle that you are there. That's a constant reboot for me, because so much of us is designed to, how can I be this and how can I change that? There's something very powerful about accepting and loving the moment, appreciating the moment. I know people say that a lot, but I think it is really, really important. Yeah.
Fantastic way to finish, David. And let me certainly say I'm very grateful to have crossed paths with you, to now have you in my life, and you cannot get away from me. I do tend to knock on people's doors when I come into their city. So it'll be a nice, gentle knock, but you'll be invited to come out and dance. Listeners and viewers, you're going to want to learn more about this man and connect with him and his programs. You can learn more about David Pearl, the programs he does for businesses, as well as the street wisdom that he offers. And the work, I appreciate especially the work that you're doing to elevate creativity in companies. But you can start by visiting streetwisdom.org. That's one place, or his site, davidpearl.net. Last week, if you missed the live show, you can always catch it via recorded podcast, wherever you get your podcast. We were on air with Dr. Raj Sisodia talking about his latest book, which is number 16, Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Healing. It was an incredible honor to have him back on the show, talking about his life in such a deeply open, vulnerable way of how he describes how he's come to be who he is. If you don't know him, he is the co-founder of the Global Conscious Capitalism Movement. I dare say you will laugh, cry, and be inspired by the interview in the book. See you next week for another vitalizing and uplifting conversation that will help you more meaningfully connect with your work while providing insight on creating destination workplaces where people can do the best work of their lives while becoming the best versions of themselves. See you there, and let's keep looking for ways to work on purpose.
We hope you've enjoyed this week's program. Be sure to tune into Working on Purpose, featuring your host, Dr. Elise Cortez, each week on W4CY. Together, we'll create a world where business operates conscientiously, leadership inspires impassioned performance, and employees are fulfilled in work that provides the meaning and purpose they crave. See you there. Let's work on purpose.